So I read Iwaihime in October for like the Halloween spirit, and it's not bad, depending on your expectations. It's written, or, well, the scenario is written by the guy that wrote Higurashi and Mineko, or if you're a little more off there, it's like Rose Gun Days. If you're expecting something like that, then you're not going to like it much. You come in without any expectations, and with anything, you might like it more just because it's that way. Like maybe if you're expecting something like Kaleidoscope, then maybe you'll like it a bit more, because while it does have a lot more budget behind this one, or at least it feels like it, the plot is more akin to this B-rated horror movie. Horror is not my thing, but the general campiness from the B-rated ones are pretty funny. Like, what was it, like Sleepover Massacre 2 or something, where it's just a random guy with a drill that looked like Michael Jackson. It was like, oh, that's kind of funny. Or was it Prince? I have to look at a cover again and see what he looks like. So I'm gonna try and make this a short one until the spoiler section, even though I don't think it's gonna be anywhere near as long as like the Musicus review I did, or the Muramasa video I did, or the Chaos Child, which I still didn't release because the editing the audio would just take too long. So there's nothing to complain about in like the art or the music or even the voice actors. It's the parts where you can see they dump money into. They even gave the main character a voice, and that's pretty rare. Funny enough, I find him to be the weakest of the six, even though he's had the most roles outside of the nurse, who's pretty famous, I think. I have a lot of titles I've read that she's in there. Though outside of the nurse, the one I could tell right off the bat was the best friend character, Natsuya. He's been in a couple of the titles I've read, and I've always known him as like, oh, he's the guy that sounds like Kiyama a little bit. You know, the hype screechy guy from Bleach and Gurren Lagann and Genshiken. I'm pretty sure he did Karen from Scarlet Nexus too. I used to be a pretty big fanboy of his when I was like 16 or something. It's not like, oh, I grew out of him, it's just I haven't watched a lot of shows, so I don't know what he's been doing now. Just every time he shows up, it's like, hey, I remember that guy, that was awesome. The character art is kind of janky, or at least for the facial expressions, and I think it's for the sake of being like, oh, we're gonna go crazy sometimes, so might as well make it in an art style that makes sense and would work well, and I think they did a good job on it. So they put a lot more attention towards like lighting and how the creasing of the clothes, depending on the posture, is really pretty top notch. But the plot itself is the issue. It starts off pretty good, and it's probably one of the better scenes in the VN itself. Honestly, I quite like the first chapter, and that in itself could just be its own movie. It's not unique, but it handles everything well, and the protag is like just a guy that moved into a new town and starting school and everything's fine. Everything's like, oh yeah, I'm having new friends, but then there's one random person that everybody's ignoring, and you're like, oh, who's that one? So, you know, it's like, oh, let me talk to her, and then shit starts happening, and that's how the movie starts after like the first 20 minutes of exposition. Each chapter introduces or goes deeper into a specific character, and they eventually all culminate into this finale, or maybe not, because a lot of it's spoilers and it's not very clear cut on how it is. You'll know what I mean once you get to it. It's not horrible, it just doesn't make sense sometimes. And I'll be going into spoilers afterwards, after like, oh, let me give the rating, like, let me give a few things that are light spoilers that you don't know what I'm talking about until you actually get to it. I was like, maybe you'll like it. It's not that bad. It was okay. I've read a lot worse. Probably still give this like a 6. And the problem with that is there's specific points where I'll give it an 8, more shit happens, I'd give it a 7, and then the DLC happened, and then like, okay, now it's a 6. And it's because like the first chapter is quite good, like I said. The next chapter is somewhat of a reset, but just a little more forwards, and oh, it diverged the path a little bit. It's how Higurashi does everything. At least for the first 4. I never got to the 5th one yet. I'll read it next year. The problem is that eventually after the 4th or the 5th chapter, none of it makes any sense anymore. It just can't function the way it's trying to. Ryu 7 has this problem where he doesn't know how or where to stop. And I think most people have that problem, and I'm not even blaming him because it should be his editor that's slapping him. No, be more concise, take this off, it's not needed. Almost like I haven't finished Higurashi, so I can't say about that one, but it always feels like if you cut a couple chapters, this would be a better experience. I even like some of the ending chapters, but as like, oh, this is stupid and funny. Like, yeah, it has good moments, but overall, you can cut it and it would be an overall better ending. And even then, the 8 is more like, oh, it has strong moments, it's clearly a campy type horror thing, it's cool, it's fun to read. it's not the 8 of this is really good. It's an 8 of, hey, I assume this is what it's gonna be, and for what it is, it's an 8. Like what's it called? It's like Friend to Lover or whatever it is. It's very stupid, but as a MOA game, it was really funny because the guy was just retarded all the time. I know some people like, oh, that's a 10 out of 10 MOA game, but if you put it as like a normal visual novel, it would be like a 6 or 7 because not much happens. It was mainly, it's like, oh, this was nice and funny. That's it. And that's the whole point. It's like, it's pretty hard to rate everything into a specific genre. Like, I can't give like some sport game a 6 out of 10 because like, well, the story sucked. It's like, yeah, no shit, the story sucked. It's never about the damn story. Overall, I think her name was Lilia. I think that was my favorite. It was like the 3rd chapter, I believe. And the worst one, excluding the DLC, because that's a whole other issue. I'm going to talk about the spoilers. I thought it was garbage. It was cool and garbage at the same time. It's probably Subakiko, whatever her name was. It's one of the first characters you meet. And it's not bad, but it's the weakest of the 3. Like, one cool thing that I liked about it was that the visual novel is called Iwaihime, right? It's the shrine, but that was changed by, I guess, the mayor or whoever's running the town, because it wasn't called Iwaihime. It was changed to get more tourists and to get more people to live here and stuff like that. It's like, no, just forget about the creepy shit that happened here. It's called Iwaihime, which is like Celebration Princess, I think, because it used to be called Nurahime, which is like Cursed Princess. And it's like, oh, why would I move? Why would I want to move there? And that was kind of funny because that's also like something you see in a normal horror movie where halfway in there's a little twist like, oh shit, the monster's weak to light, or some stupid shit they always put in there. This is light spoilers, I guess I could say it. So everybody's having a decent time except for these 4 to 5 girls, because apparently everybody in their teenage years get hauntings, except they have very severe hauntings because they have an ailment inside them. The ailment itself is the curse. In its own way, by changing the name, it's also like referring to the plot itself, where these 4 or 5 girls are pretty much having the worst draw and they just have to deal with it while the rest of the town is having a happy time. So now it's gonna be the spoiler sections. I don't know, 3, 2, 1, I guess. So I mentioned it before that each chapter resets itself slightly. It's always diverging a little bit so the plot can continue. And that's simply because the world always gets hit by some kind of calamity from this curse. And if you change what he's doing a little bit, well, now that calamity's off and now a new one's happening. And for a good bit, I thought this was like alternate universes, but the DLC explains it later on that no, that's not what it is, but it's still dumb and doesn't make much sense, I guess. The first 4 chapters are only like half done, and then it lets it be fully developed by the upcoming chapters. And you can choose these by whatever order. Doesn't make any sense why you can choose them, because that takes away the continuity that you can have with it. Let's say, I guess it'll be chapter 5. Chapter 5 is like the flashback chapter and shows everything that's happening from 1,000 years ago. And then with that, now you know the overall story of what's happening. It's important, and this links back to chapter 1 and what I think her name was Toei, and how what she's saying is like, oh yeah, it's always 1,000 years too late, is referring to that. Then after that, each chapter you can choose by the 3 to pick one of the girls, and you have to pick all of them. So at that point, was it really a choice? You're still doing every of them. And Subakiko, whatever her name was, is always best to be left last. So it looks really weird if you picked her first. So I picked by the order of, like, chapter 2 was Tomoye, I think. Minobe. So I just did it that way of like, well, Minobe first, then Lily, and then her, which makes the most sense, but the endings themselves don't make sense, but they're still canon, and I'll talk about that later, or actually pretty soon, but I want to talk about other things first. So like, the reason why these chapters are happening is because the main character has to not cure, but like wipe out the curse from inside them. But he also fails in the 6th chapter, I think. This is the one that connects with the chapter 1, and fails, and then the calamity happens again, and then it gets reset again because it's not a multi-universe thing. So each time you're wiping one, and when you're wiping one curse, there's always this ending where it's like, well, now the girl that you saved is into you. To be fair, they're all into the main character pretty much right away, which is weird. But the visual novel does that a lot, and it's actually something I complain about sometimes, but it is what it is. So they kiss the guy and also trick Natsuya, which is the best friend. He's probably my favorite character. And this happens 3 times for each girl. And Natsuya gets tricked each time. And you're like, well, this is because this scene doesn't actually count. They won't address the scene later, but they do. So Natsuya is so stupid that he gets tricked by the same thing every time. And each one is surprised by the action every time. By different ones, like, oh, these 3 are not surprised. How these 3 are surprised by the one that did it. And I was like, oh, this is dumb. So now they're all okay, or at least the 3, right? And now he's perfected his form, he's got the blessing. So now it's a pretty cool scene, I guess. And he goes in and breaks the bell that the main heroine is in. So, oh, I finally saved you, and that was cool. But he ends up dying because the blessing was too strong for him. So the deer god, which was from the flashback, a lot of things you're not going to understand unless you read it, and these are just spoilers. And I'm not going to, because then it'll take, this would be like a 2-hour long review, right? So the deer god is like, hey, yeah, you had a pretty shitty life for 1,000 years. I'll give you a wish. And she's like, yeah, bring the guy back. And he's like, nah, I can't do that. He's dead. I can give you... He can revive for a little bit and then die again because you can't just... But then it's like, all right, save the me from 1,000 years ago. And he does, and it creates its own universe, its own alternate universe. And I think reviving one guy is easier than making a copy of every soul of this planet and making a whole other copy of it where this character gets saved. Because if it was the same one, the timeline would change. All these characters wouldn't exist, but they do. So it's an alternate universe. So in the alternate universe, it saves the girl, so now the town is just cursed because they're trying to remove the curse. So now they were cursed for like 6 to 8 years. I forgot what it was. And it's like, oh, the gods kind of like us again. We were respectful in everything we're doing, and when we took the curse. And the deer god's like, hey, that's pretty cool. All right, for all that you've done, you get a wish. And it's like, all right, I want to make the girl that wished all this in the beginning to be happy too. So then they revive the main characters like, dude, I thought you said you couldn't do it. So it happens, and now there's like a whole summer vacation thing. And this is where I drop it a grade because it ended well. It was a stupid ending, but it's like, oh, it was a good ending. It was emotional in a bit. There's a whole funeral scene. It was nice. And now this whole summer thing, and now like the old ex of Toei's there, and he's like a gag character now. It was funny, but why is it there? It really feels like, if I give an example, because I like Terminator 2 a lot. It's like, imagine after Terminator 2 and he goes down the lava, and it's like, hey, thumbs up, and then there's like 10 minutes of them playing volleyball. Why are you doing volleyball? So all of this happens because now all 4 girls are like trying to get into his pants, and they have a whole wrestling match, was pretty cool. But also, again, why is this here? Why is any of this happening? It became a slice of life thing, and it's the same issue that I had with Sakura no Mori Dreamers, where the ending halfway through was the best way to cut it, and then they just do moe for a long time, and it's like, you made the game worse by doing this. So, you know, things happen, and then the guy and Toei is like, well, I am not Mutsu, which was like the guy from 1,000 years ago. They're like, are you her? Because she's kind of having the same mentality each time, and they still get together because like, well, yeah, you're not Mutsu and that's gone, but I also like you and that kind of stuff. You know, those feelings are reciprocated, and it's like, oh, that's nice. And then he dies because, again, it was just borrowed time, and for some reason, everybody is crying, and you're like, they told you it would be borrowed time no matter what. And that's fine, but then the nurse also dies because she was like the, I guess, 5th? Yeah, the 5th daughter that was cursed, but she was like more in tune with all the spiritual shit. So when she died, she scattered all the soot that she had around the school or something. So now the 4 girls that are no longer cursed with all these super hauntings, it's like, oh, now some of your spiritual power comes back. So now you can see the nurse and the main guy again, even though they're dead. And they're all happy about it. And I'm just wondering, is like, doesn't that mean you can get hauntings again? I thought that was the whole point. Like, yeah, you can see him, but also that happens. So that's kind of dumb. Sure, it's never going to be to the same extreme of what they had before because all of it was based on their traumas, and the hauntings are just abusing that weak spot, and now they don't have it anymore, but they're still going to get something else. But whatever. At this point, it's a 7. And now to the DLC. I don't even know what or where this is even placed. they're all suffering from the hauntings again, so it's not the ending. Because the main character is now alive again because the outline is gone, so you assume it's like, well, all of them are suffering from hauntings. So this is like chapter 5 or maybe 6 before the choices happen. And it could work because like, well, the nurse knows he has some kind of healing effect. So you think it's like, oh, chapter 5 or 6. Okay, I get it. But by the end, it's stated that they already took care of at least the first 3 curses or the 3 divisions. At least. It might have been all of them, but I think just at least. So you think like, well, okay, this is chapter 7 or 8 when the summer vacation happens then. But at that time, they were all cured. So what the fuck's happening? How is this working? And the funny shit is, now that the dear spirits that were cursing all these people for like 1,000 years are also revealed to be cursed as well by a new big bad. I forgot the Japanese name, it's very famous. It's the Orochi guy. It's the big ass snake. He gets shit on in like 2 minutes. He gets revealed in 2 minutes. There was no reason why he was there. There was no foreshadowing I saw from it. And yet it makes sense, like, yes, the curse itself, because in the final chapter you also see that the main curse, even though they hate everybody, they don't really hate Toei. So there's like, they were fucked, and that's why they're just mad. They were mad for a long time, and since their time is different from ours, it makes sense why they could be angry for a long time too. But they were also cursed because they could never get rid of their anger. That's the concept of this one, and it was kind of long for that, and it's kind of dumb. Like, was any of this necessary? Nah. Sure, you get to know what's up with the nurse, but it's not like you needed to understand for the main plot. You already know what was happening. It's like if you knew, oh, this character has special powers, and she did something with special powers, and now it's, oh, now there's a whole DLC to explain how she got special powers. Like, it didn't matter. It wasn't like revealed later that she has special powers. You already knew. Like, if it was like, oh, she was normal for the whole time, and in the finale she got random powers, now you want to know why, what happened, but you already knew why. She was one of the daughters. It's just placed really weird. You can't place it anywhere really, because no matter what, it's like either the main character shouldn't be this well developed yet to kill or calm down the curse, and if he was, then the girl shouldn't be cursed at all. It doesn't make any sense. Like, if you took the main character out of it altogether, then this would make sense, because you could place it almost anywhere. It'll be fine. Like, the main character himself kind of ruins part of it, because it's like there's a scene where she's back into the haunting thing and she's getting tortured. Except the scene beforehand, you saw all 4 of them and the guy, but then when the torture happened, only 4 of them were there and the guy was not around at all. So it's like, you know this is not happening because nothing's happening with the guy and the guy's not doing anything. He has no lines. He's just randomly there. So then you just wasted like an hour of like, oh, gotcha. We all kind of knew. There was no like, oh wow, that's surprising. Nothing happened. And that's why it's a 6, because what makes sense keeps breaking. And if they ended where the guy just died the first time before getting revived, it would make sense. If he gets revived, then you have a happy ending. Also, okay, makes sense. Second time he dies, and now he's kind of semi-cursing all 4 people, or yeah, 4 people. It was like, all right, kind of thing you're trying to do, it kind of backfired, and now you're back in square one, except it's not as bad, and you can see them. But also, when they get older, you're going to go away anyway, because their spiritual connection just dies. So they're going to be sad no matter what, so you might as well just be sad now and get over with it. Like, if they just did the thing where Toei is just going to wait another 1,000 years for another chance, and then end it that way without any of the other stuff, I would like it more just like, well, they're continuing the thing, and maybe one of my lineage will meet him again, and then this time we will finally be happy or something like that, and it would make sense. But no, they did this weird haunting thing. That's Iwaihime. It continually got worse. If we go by scales, it will like start as a 7. Near the middle of chapter 1, it was like an 8, and this was good. And then it was kind of 7 for a while until the choices, and still 7 until the end. It became 6 by the DLC. So right now I am reading Aokana. I think it's made by Sprite, which I think they made Koi Choco, which I really like. I know a lot of people that didn't like the main girl, I guess, is the forced one that you have to read in the first route, but I really liked her. So I'm hoping she's kind of there again. But the one that looks like Chanatsu, I think her name was, is Asuka, but she's not like her, so I guess it doesn't count. But I hit the first route, I guess, and she's crying because like, oh, my feelings were reciprocated, so she's crying. So like, oh, maybe that's copied, because at one point it was like, oh, it's not the same character, but this Masaki girl is probably going to be the new Chanatsu. But who knows? I heard it was really good, and I'm reading it. you know, I really liked how it started and how it's going, but I'm just worried maybe again, like how Iwaihime, I thought it started well and then it turned into a shit show eventually, but who knows? I'm hoping not. I hear a lot of praise, so I'm assuming it's gonna be good.